A missing American airman, a countdown clock ticking toward midnight, a chokehold on the world's oil supply, and two nuclear-armed powers exchanging threats of absolute annihilation. This is not a movie. This is the world right now, today, on the 36th day of a war that has already redrawn the map of the Middle East and sent shockwaves crashing through every economy on the planet. And in the next few minutes, you are going to understand exactly what is happening, why it matters to every single person watching this, regardless of where you live, and what the next 48 hours could mean for the entire world order. Let us go back to the beginning, because this crisis did not appear out of nowhere. For years, tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran had been building like pressure behind a cracked dam. Iran had been advancing its nuclear program at a pace that alarmed Western governments and Israel in particular. Massive protests had erupted across Iran in the final weeks of 2025, with millions of Iranians taking to the streets in what became the largest uprising the country had seen since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Iranian government responded with deadly force. Meanwhile, diplomatic talks were quietly happening behind the scenes. Just days before the conflict exploded, an Omani diplomat announced that a significant breakthrough had been reached, that Iran had agreed in principle to halt uranium enrichment and allow independent verification. Peace appeared to be genuinely within reach. Talks were scheduled to resume in early March. They never happened. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated wave of strikes against Iran. In the very first hours of that attack, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed, along with members of his family and a number of the country's most senior military commanders. Iran declared 40 days of national mourning, and the Middle East was never the same again. Now, 36 days into this conflict, the scale of what is unfolded is almost impossible to comprehend. Iran has responded with relentless waves of drones and ballistic missiles aimed at Israel, at American military bases scattered across the region, and at the Gulf Arab states that host United States forces. Iranian attacks have struck military installations in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. 7 American service members have been confirmed killed. Hundreds of civilians across multiple countries have lost their lives. The Lebanese militant group, Hezbollah, began firing rockets at Israel in support of Iran, triggering a full Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon that has now killed more than 1,300 people and displaced over 1 million civilians. Yemen's Houthi movement announced this week that it has officially joined the fight, launching a joint missile and drone attack on Israel alongside Iranian and Hezbollah forces. The front lines of this war now stretch from the mountains of northwestern Iran to the beaches of the Persian Gulf, from the streets of Beirut to the skies over Tel Aviv. But today, on this Saturday, the 5th of April, the story that has gripped the entire world is the fate of one American airman whose fighter jet was shot down over Iranian territory on Friday. An American F-15 strike jet was hit by Iranian air defenses while conducting operations inside Iran. One crew member was recovered fairly quickly and is now safely back in American custody. The second crew member, a weapons systems officer, landed somewhere inside Iran, has been missing ever since. Search and rescue teams launched an immediate operation deep behind enemy lines to find him. Iranian tribesmen reportedly fired on American rescue helicopters as they searched. Iranian state television broadcast offers of rewards for his capture. Iranian authorities said they were also mounting their own search. Then, within the last few hours as this script was being written, American forces confirmed they had successfully recovered the missing airman. Military analysts described the rescue operation as one of the most daring and dangerous such missions in recent American military history, conducted entirely within hostile territory deep inside a country that the United States is actively bombing. The rescued airman's identity has not been publicly released, but his safe return brings at least a measure of relief to an administration under enormous pressure as the war enters its 6th week with no clear end in sight. That pressure is coming from every direction. Polls conducted in recent weeks show that public support for the war among Americans has been declining. Protests broke out across Israel this weekend, with thousands gathering in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa demanding an end to the conflict. Israel's Supreme Court had authorized a protest of 600 people, but authorities found nearly 1,000 demonstrators in the square, drawing an intense police presence. Left-wing activists in Israel have been increasingly vocal in their opposition to a war they describe as both unjust and dangerously open-ended. On the Iranian side, defiance remains the dominant public posture. Tehran has flatly rejected what it described as a humiliating and desperate ultimatum from the American president. The Iranian foreign minister left open the possibility of peace talks through Pakistani mediation, but gave no indication that the country is prepared to meet the Central American demand, which is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow waterway at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, and it is the single most important choke point in the global energy system. Under normal circumstances, roughly 1/5 of all the oil and liquefied natural gas traded on Earth flows through that passage every single day. Since the war began, Iran has effectively shut it down. Iranian forces have used a combination of naval harassment, drone attacks on commercial vessels, and outright threats to prevent almost all international shipping from passing through. The result has been catastrophic for global energy markets. The price of Brent crude oil has climbed back above $100 a barrel, a level not seen since the previous decade. American drivers are now paying an average of $4.10 per gallon at the pump, a 37% increase since the strikes began on February 28th. In California, that average has soared to nearly $6 a gallon. The International Energy Agency, which coordinates the energy policies of the world's wealthiest economies, announced that all 32 of its member countries had unanimously agreed to release 400 million barrels of oil from their strategic reserves in an attempt to stabilize prices. The United States alone pledged 172 million barrels from its strategic petroleum reserve. Despite this historic intervention, prices barely moved. The market's message was clear: no reserve release can substitute for the volume of oil that normally flows through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. The economic ripple effects are spreading far beyond the gas pump. The airline industry, which had been projecting record profits of $41 billion for 2026, is now in freefall. The price of Jet F has more than doubled since the war began. Airlines from New Zealand to Vietnam have begun cutting flights. The South Korean carrier announced it was moving into what it called emergency management mode. The president of the Philippines warned that grounding domestic flights was a real possibility. China, which has the ability to route its aircraft over Russian airspace and bypass the Middle East entirely, has been adding thousands of flights to Europe, gaining a competitive advantage even as Chinese carriers remain exposed to the broader energy shock. One Chinese regional airline announced plans to raise fuel surcharges by 5 times starting this very weekend. Federal Reserve officials have begun warning publicly that the war is creating serious inflationary pressure that could make it harder for the central bank to lower interest rates this year. One senior Fed official told reporters that, before the conflict began, he had been confident that rate cuts were coming in 2026. That confidence, he said, had evaporated. For millions of American families still recovering from the inflation that followed the pandemic, this is deeply unwelcome news. Against this backdrop, President Trump issued his sharpest threat yet on Friday, posting a message to his Truth Social platform warning that unless Iran agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz by Monday, the full force of American military power would come raining down on the country. He had previously issued a 10-day ultimatum, then extended it, then pushed the deadline to April 6th. After saying that talks were progressing, Iran's response this weekend was to publicly mock the ultimatum, with Iranian officials calling it the words of someone who was helpless and nervous. Iranian military commanders warned that the entire region would become unbearable for American and Israeli forces if the attacks on Iran's infrastructure continued. Iran's foreign minister suggested that the country would only accept peace talks if reparations were part of the deal, and if Iran retained a meaningful role in managing access to the strait. Those conditions appear nowhere close to being acceptable to Washington. Meanwhile, the military action is escalating rather than contracting. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed this week that Israel had struck Iran's petrochemical plants in the southwestern part of the country, including a major complex in an area called Mashar that Israeli officials said was producing materials used in weapons manufacturing. Iran reported that strikes had damaged dozens of universities and research facilities across the country, with officials saying that 30 or more higher education institutions have now been affected since the start of the war. A laser and plasma research center at one of Tehran's most prestigious universities was hit just days ago. Iran's science minister visited the damaged site and told reporters that Iranian scientists had been targeted for decades and that this war represented an intensified chapter in that campaign. Iran has been striking back not only at Israel but at the Gulf states hosting American forces. Kuwait's state oil infrastructure was hit by Iranian drone attacks this weekend, causing significant fires at an oil sector complex and damage to a government office compound. 2 power and water treatment plants in Kuwait were also struck, forcing shutdowns. Bahrain reported a fire at an unspecified facility linked to an Iranian attack. The United Arab Emirates said its air defense systems intercepted dozens of ballistic missiles and drones in a single day this week, an extraordinary figure that underscores how intense the exchanges have become. A senior Israeli defense official said this weekend that Israel was preparing to expand its strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure in the days ahead. Iran also announced that it was exempting Iraq from the Hormuz restrictions, saying that the blockade applied only to what Tehran called enemy nations. This was widely interpreted as a diplomatic signal directed at Baghdad, which has been caught in an extraordinarily difficult position, hosting both American forces and maintaining close ties with Iran. India, the world's third largest oil importer, made a significant and symbolically loaded move this week by purchasing Iranian crude for the first time in years. The Indian government confirmed the purchase, reflecting the reality that countries around the world are scrambling to secure energy supplies wherever they can find them, regardless of the geopolitical complications involved. The diplomatic landscape is nearly barren. Pakistan has offered to mediate, and Iran has expressed gratitude for the offer, but no formal talks have been scheduled. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni became the first leader of a major Western ally to visit the Gulf region since the war began, traveling to Saudi Arabia and Qatar this weekend to urge dialogue and underscore the urgency of reopening the strait for European energy security. European finance ministers from Italy, Germany, Spain, Portugal, and Austria have called on the European Union to consider taxing windfall energy profits to protect consumers from the price surge. The United Nations Secretary General has condemned the strikes on Iran. The UN Security Council has passed a resolution condemning Iranian retaliatory strikes on Gulf states. Legal scholars and international relations experts have described the original American and Israeli attacks as potentially illegal under international law and a violation of Iranian sovereignty. The International Atomic Energy Agency noted before the war began that it had found no conclusive evidence of an active Iranian nuclear weapons program at the time the strikes were launched. That finding has added fuel to the fierce debate in Western countries over whether this war was justified, necessary, or legal. What makes this moment so historically significant is the sheer scope of what is at stake. This conflict has been described by economists as the worst energy supply disruption the world has seen since the oil crisis of the 1970s. It involves the United States in direct combat operations against a major regional power for the first time in decades. It has drawn in multiple armed groups, displaced over 1 million people in Lebanon, spread drone and missile strikes across a dozen countries, and is now actively reshaping global trade routes, airline networks, financial markets, and diplomatic alliances in real time. The 48-hour deadline expires on Monday. Iran has shown no signs of capitulating. The United States has shown no signs of backing down. The missing airman has been brought home safely, which removes one flashpoint, but the deeper conflict remains as volatile and unpredictable as ever. What happens next inside Iran matters enormously. The death of the supreme leader created a power vacuum that has been filled by his son, but the legitimacy of that succession is disputed, and the country is navigating an extraordinary internal political transition while being bombed by two of the world's most powerful militaries. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz matters to every economy on the planet. And what happens in Washington and Tel Aviv over the next 72 hours may determine whether this war expands into something even more catastrophic or whether some form of negotiated pause becomes possible. This is a story without a resolution yet. It is unfolding hour by hour, strike by strike, deadline by deadline, and the world is watching. If you want to stay informed as this crisis develops, this channel will bring you every major update as it happens. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think diplomacy can still work, or has this conflict already passed the point of no return? Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is happening, and subscribe so you never miss a critical update, because in a situation moving this fast, being informed is not optional.